trigger points or what are some of the events that have happened to make it to have some of these new rules. And then we will sort of dive into the solution and technology itself from both Solix and Oracle side, and how we actually address the issues we are going to talk about it initially in this presentation. So that will be the format of the presentation. To start with, fundamentally, when we are talking to the customers or enterprises about, well, what are they trying to do about how to better manage and how to protect the data assets. Some of the key things that often come up is, one is large enterprises have many applications, and when we say many applications, we are talking about tens of applications or hundreds of them. And this could range from ERP applications, CRM applications, custom developed applications. And the point is, like, the data is continuously growing. There is no sort of end to it, and the data keeps growing. But the downside of it is basically almost about 80% of the data or 85% of the data is historical in nature and seldom accessed. So, but when the data is growing, essentially the performance of the application is sort of degrading, and obviously the production applications are run on tier 1 storage. So both performance is sort of going down and the storage costs are increasing. So how do we address that sort of issue? And then sort of and the next part of the thing is, how do we actually look at the data centers or enterprises which have many applications, and most of these cases, these legacy applications are seldom used. But typically what we have seen is enterprises want to keep these applications because they need the data from the application itself. And the data is required either from a compliance point of view or some litigation is going on and so forth. And some typical example could be, there might be companies who have sold a product a few years back, and a product recall might come up in the next future. Nobody knows about that. But when that happens, they need to have access to the data. But they're no longer using that application. So the question is, how can we actually consolidate and rationalize these existing applications and retire the application but keep the data for compliance reasons? So, and the other side of the issues we are seeing here is more on the application testing. And basically what we mean by that is, like, all these large, you can have huge production databases, and these databases typically need to be cloned out for a test and development purposes. So again, when you're talking about, let's say, for example, a terabyte of database in production, if you want to clone 5 copies of it, basically you're looking at 5 terabytes of storage. And then, of course, it's just not the question of storage, but the amount of time it actually takes to do that. And once you do that, then you are basically bringing the production data into this test and development copy, and that's where the big issue comes in. Well, how do we actually protect these data assets? And what can we actually do about it? And so in that context, so these applications have all this sensitive data, for example, social security numbers, salaries, credit card numbers, date of birth. And in case of healthcare systems, potentially be the prescriptions and so forth. And when you actually bring the data into the test and development side, then how do we actually protect them? And there are studies done by analysts and several other organizations where they have seen the data breach actually happening from insider attacks, and that's a large percentage of them. And then many companies also sort of work outsource the test and development, and essentially when you do outsourcing, so how do we actually protect the data? And not only that, there are specific country laws where they define that the data should not be actually going outside the there was sensitive information in the databases for about 265,000 state workers. And basically, that database has been hacked, and this information includes social security numbers and employee names and so forth. But the key thing here is the breach wasn't discovered until a few days or a few weeks, and employees are only notified sometime after that. So, and all these things basically led to the first data breach notification law by California, but essentially number of states have actually followed it, so that we have more than 40 states who have specific state laws on how to protect the sensitive data. And of course, not only that, how do they actually keep the public trust, because they're actually taking the data from the public, and it is their job to make sure that the data is actually protected. So I think that sort of translates to, well, how does the IT sort of take care of that? So I want to kind of quickly dive into the specific case study as well, since we are talking about the federal and state laws. And this is a very interesting case study we have been going through, and again, this is something we are doing with Oracle as such. And this is a large state government where we are working with our customer, and they're actually using PeopleSoft for financials, even and other applications. And essentially their sort of model is like, well, we need like several test and development copies, but the IT operations are essentially outsourced. So how do I actually comply to the federal and state data privacy laws, and how do I protect my the addresses or social security numbers and so forth? So some of the challenges they have been going through is essentially about they have the hundreds of tables in PeopleSoft HRMS or financials, and how can we actually consistently do the data masking? So just not across one table or two tables, but we're essentially talking about hundreds of tables and probably thousands of columns. And essentially this is where we have sort of been using the Oracle technology as well as Solid technology for data masking and providing the solution to the customer, the state government, which would enable them for rapid changes and also being flexible on how it is actually done. And I want to talk a little bit about the common issues when we are talking about the data masking. I mean, we have customers asking, hey, we have something homegrown solution or so forth, but that is only taking us so far. So some of the issues they keep bringing up is, well, when you're talking about these hundreds of tables, how do you essentially enforce the data integrity by just with a homegrown existing solution? And not only that, as I said, the enterprises don't have a single application. We are talking about tens of applications. And even in the state government, we are talking about, PeopleSoft, different versions, different modules, and so forth. So how do we support consistently all the packaged applications as well as custom developed applications? And how can we provide the flexibility with customers using different algorithms so that they can actually use different ways to map and secure the data depending on the type of the data structure itself. And then, of course, one of the key things is how do we enable separation of duties between the DBAs, application administrators, and so forth. And actually, Jagan is going to spend a little time on that specific topic. He has a slide on that, and we will look at some of the key things there on the separation of the duties itself. And again, as I said, the solution needs to work across multiple applications in heterogeneous IT infrastructure, across different databases, and so forth. So these are some of the common things we are looking at. And so far what we have done is taken a step back and see what the customers are saying, what our enterprises are looking at, what are the key issues, and we talked about the compliance and laws and how they have been getting formulated on how things have been changing in the last few years. manage and protect their application data assets in an optimized and a secure fashion, by which I mean providing better application performance. And I talked a little bit about this in the very beginning, where we said the application data is consistently growing, but which sort of leads to the performance issues and then, of course, the storage cost. So how to sort of better manage those applications? And then once you have the data, how can we better protect them to the application testing phase, both in the test data management and data masking side, and how we can actually optimize data centers or large IT organizations with more productivity, lower storage costs, and also if on the bigger side, basically how can you rationalize your data assets and how can you actually consolidate your data assets for a better information lifecycle management, so that you are keeping only the data that is required in the production systems and moving the semi-active or historical data into the archive, and then of course destructing the data which is not required anymore by the enterprises. But in this session, we are going to focus on two things that is more on the application testing and which sort of involve test data management and data masking. So to give you a very high-level overview on the Solix product set itself, on the architecture, essentially Solix product is Solix Enterprise Data Management Suite, or what we call Solix EDMS, which is sort of built using the modern architecture and built ground up to support heterogeneous IT infrastructures. And essentially, as you can see in this slide, we have a set of data management services that gives you flexibility to talk to different data sources or the other kind of storage technologies, like could be basic file system, content repositories, or cloud storage. And on top of the data management services, we have what we call the component services, which are focused on things we talked about, the archiving, rationalizing and consolidation of data assets in the application requirement space, and then the test data management and data masking. And one of the core pieces of this product set is what we call the metadata services, which allows you to capture the metadata for the either enterprise applications or custom applications. And the Solix EDMS sort of ships with what we call the knowledge bases or metadata pre-built out of the box for many enterprise applications, and it basically provides what we call application awareness out of the box for e-business suite, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, Eagle, and so forth. And you can basically build these kind of knowledge bases for any custom application that is running on any type of a database. And then basically, as I said, the product is sort of built ground up on the modern architecture, which allows us to run on different application servers and also integrate with the enterprise management tools like Oracle Enterprise Manager and so forth. So moving on to the focusing on the test data management and starting with the subsetting and cloning process. And if you look at the cloning itself, and basically when I say cloning here, we are talking about enterprises or IT saying that, well, I have a terabyte of database, my production database, but I need to clone 5 copies of that for different test and development purpose. And basically we have seen, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the case studies, we have seen customers spending few days, 10 to 14 days just trying to clone the production databases. So, and that's where Solix technology comes in to play, where we can significantly reduce the cloning times from days to hours by automating the process and also integrating with several third-party virtualization tools and, of course, Oracle solution as well. And once you have actually a smaller size clone, the right size clone without having to go through the entire process of replicating the application and the database itself, and also subset with the right set of data itself. And then, of course, by having the smaller clones, you have a smaller set of data itself, and then which allows you to better protect and manage the sensitive data, and that's where the data masking sort of comes into play. And essentially, as you can see in this specific slide, you can create a full-size clone if need be, but you can also use the data masking technology to take the subsets of the data and then mask the right sets of data or the right columns and so forth. So let me take a specific example here, a case study on from one of our customers, which is sort of one of the leaders in the logistics industry, and they are running an e-business suite running on Oracle database. And again, they have also sort of outsourced some of their IT operations, and their biggest challenge was like, well, how do I actually clone my application databases? And they were literally taking about 11 to 14 days to do that. And on top of that, they actually wanted to create country-specific subsets so that the clones only had like a specific subset of the data itself. And so here we have taken the Solix EDMS technology itself and provided ways to classify the data or create policies or business rules which would allow you to classify the data into different subsets and use the single pass technology to create the clones with the right subsetted data and so forth. And we have seen the cloning time actually reduced to 300%. And again, storage requirements going down by 50%. And of course, all this also translates into the IT and operational efficiency. And this is something which I mentioned briefly, which is policy-based data masking. And one of the key things I mentioned about Solix technology is being application-aware or shipping knowledge bases out of the box for many applications, so that you could actually leverage these metadata models for all these applications and use that to protect the data which is related in a consistent fashion. And the solution supports several different algorithms, and you can also create your own custom rules. And this is again, I think this is where we sort of come in, and we also integrate with Oracle Enterprise Manager to complement Oracle data masking solution and so forth. So, as I mentioned, this is a slide where we are talking about the metadata manager in the Solix product itself, which contains all the metadata on how the data needs to be managed and how it can work out of the box for several prepackaged applications or custom applications. This is a quick example since we looked at in some case studies having PeopleSoft and e-business suite, just to give you an example of some of the table structures on how the PeopleSoft has and how the same set of data items could actually be replicated in different tables and how it could be related. But the key item here is how do we actually interrelate all these things and do the masking in a consistent fashion. And again, sort of before I pass it on to Jagan here, so basically we have the integration with Oracle Enterprise Manager where you can define this set of preceded definitions and then have that be executed from the Enterprise Manager and so forth. So this is again going back to what we have done on the integration with the Oracle Enterprise Manager and how we can use Solix knowledge bases or templates with Oracle data masking pack, and how you can have a single holistic solution from Oracle to manage the complete set of applications from a single system management environment. So before I pass on to Jagan, just a short list of the several customers who are using the technology from Solix. And also I just wanted to mention the partnerships we have with Oracle as such. And so we data masking pack, we talked about that, and we'll see how that actually comes into play in the next slides that Jagan is going to present. And we also have the Oracle Financial Services Execute Banking Application. They have actually OEM Solix technology, and they're actually providing the same solution as an archiving functionality as part of the Oracle's prices. So at this point of time, I would actually pass on to Jagan, and he will sort of talking about the database security and then Oracle Enterprise Management.
Thanks, Raghu. Hi, everyone. This is Charan Atre. I'm the Director of Product Management in the Oracle Enterprise Manager product line, and I specifically manage the database management packs in my role. So we're happy to be presenting this webinar jointly with Solix. And just to give you an idea, data masking is really one of the several security-related solutions offered by Oracle. Other solutions for monitoring being configuration management, audit fault, total recall, and for managing access to different production systems, we have database vault and label security, and then specifically inside the database to encrypt and mask systems for production security. We have advanced security for managing your backups. We have securing backups and as well as for masking data in non-production systems. We have the data masking pack. So just want to make sure we are clarified on the terms. So next slide, please. Not sure if I can move. Good. Okay. So the data masking pack is really about taking the original sensitive data in your production environment and replacing that in your non-production environments with data which is very similar, has the same type and characteristics as the original data, but is not dependent or based on the original data, and to do it in an irreversible way. And this is really critical because we want to make sure that not only when the data, you don't necessarily have control over this data when it leaves your shore. So you want to make sure that people can't apply brute force to go back and reverse engineer the data. So in fact, this data can remain protected and has no relationship to the original data. And that's really what the data masking pack does for you. It anonymizes sensitive information, everything from customer information, financial information, company confidential information, or regulatory information, and make sure that it can be used to create new data, which is very similar. So a Social Security number looks like a Social Security number, name looks like a name, credit card number looks like a credit card number. So this data can be shared with the non-production users. So let's go through some examples as to how you would go about doing the masking process. So Oracle really looks at it as a four-step methodology. We call that FAST, which stands for Find, Assess, Secure, and Test. So Find is really about identifying all the sources of sensitive data in your database. And some of the capabilities provided by Solix, such as their accelerators for different applications, make it easy to reduce the time that you would spend in identifying different types of sensitive data. Then Assess, which is to identify different types of masks that you would use to apply to different types of sensitive data. For instance, the appropriate Social Security number mask, name mask, etc. And again, our partnership with Solix has allowed us to create predefined mappings for some of the standard sources of sensitive data. And then is the process of securing it and testing it. Securing it is actually executing the mask itself and producing the test system, and then testing your application to make sure your application can be used and is functional, at the same time masking the sensitive fields. So that's sort of the four-step process. And I'll talk about some of the capabilities within the data masking pack that helps you do that. So the first is the rich and extensible mask format. So Oracle Data Masking Pack ships with a rich library letters and then 4 numbers or any such combination thereof to create your own custom format. And so the Solix accelerators are actually just come in and they get registered as mass primitives, which can then be used and applied to any environment within your enterprise. So this is an example of how you would use some of our user-defined formats. If you think of things like names and email addresses, you may use predefined formats to mask the first name and the last name. But what do you do about email addresses? The typical format that most customers use today is they generate a standard email address like sysadmin@company.com. Unfortunately, when you actually mask everything to the same email address, you're not able to test whether unique emails got sent out to different users. So, for example, if an employee created a purchase order and a manager approved a purchase order, you want to make sure that both sets of people got different sets of messages. Using user-defined formats, you can generate fake email addresses using sites such as spambot.com or mailinator.com. You generate fake email addresses consisting of a fake first name, fake employee, fake last name at this, at this domain.com. This allows you to create fake addresses, which you can then use to verify that the fake employee created a PO and the fake manager got the approval request as well. So that's where you would use user-defined masks to create these custom email addresses for application testing. Now, once you have identified each of these, the combination of the sources of sensitive columns as well as these mass formats are strung together to create something what we call mass definition. Oracle Data Masking Pack automatically identifies all sensitive data and their related foreign key relationships if those constraints are stored inside the database. If they are application-managed constraints, such as those maintained in PeopleSoft or Siebel, Oracle Data Masking Pack allows you to register these relationships. So, for instance, a definition generated by the knowledge base within Solix can be automatically read and stored as a mass definition within the Data Masking Pack. And as and when you upgrade your application to different versions, you can use create-like to generate new versions of these definitions, so thereby you're always maintaining and tracking the changes or evolution of your mass definition as it applies across different versions of your applications. So we talked about how you can not only maintain database-related relationships, but also application-enforced relationships, and they are easily managed all from a single page, so you can see how each of your primary keys and the state of foreign keys are maintained automatically. Now, this management is absolutely critical because you want to make sure that when you mask a particular, employee ID, which is typically can be used to access benefits information, you want to make sure all the related foreign keys are also masked so that the original employee data is completely erased from the system, yet the relationship between the different rows is preserved so that the application will continue to find the right employee, the right support rep, the right sales rep, and maintain, even though the original number of the employee is gone from the system. So in addition to that, Oracle Data Masking Pack supports several sophisticated masking techniques. Now, these masking techniques are specifically put in place because there are business requirements that may require different types of masking techniques. For instance, the Data Masking Pack supports compound mask, which is the ability to take a set of related columns, such as an address consisting of a street address, city, state, zip, country, and mask them together as a set as opposed to one column at a time. The challenge is if you amass one column at a time is you might end up with addresses such as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Redwood Shores, New Jersey, where none of the fields match, and therefore you might get errors from the application because it may not find a valid address. So by creating and masking all these columns as a set, you may make sure that the existing address record is replaced by a corresponding address record which is valid, but is not the original value that was in your production system. The second is condition-based mask. Now, condition-based mask is very useful when you want to apply different types of business rules to the same data based on different conditions, such as if you have an HR system in which you have different countries, national identifiers being maintained, you want to apply different national identifier formats based on the value of the country code. For instance, you may want to apply Social Security numbers for U.S. employees, Social Insurance number for Canadian employees, and National Insurance number for UK-based employees. Condition-based masking allows you to specify separate mask formats for each condition. So whether you want to mask Social Security number, national identifiers, or driver's licenses differently for different values of the country or state, you can do that very easily using condition-based masking. The third is deterministic masking. One of the requirements that often customers face is that when you have different types of data being maintained across different databases, the data needs to be masked consistently because they want to preserve the relationship between the data while making sure that the original data is gone from the system. Deterministic masking provided within the data masking pack makes sure that a given value always consistently maps to a different mask value consistently across different databases. So thereby, if an employee ID is being maintained in an HR system as well as in a Salesforce automation database as well as a warehouse application, you want to make sure that when the employee maps in one system one way, it gets mapped the same way in the other two databases. So thereby, all the data is related consistently, and that's supported through the deterministic masking capability of the data masking pack. So now that we have defined different types of mask formats, the next question is how do you go about executing this process? The Oracle Data Masking Pack supports the separation of duties with integrated workflow, allowing the application administrator to be responsible for setting up the mask definition, identifying the mask formats, and ultimately creating the mask definition, which is then handed off to the DBA for execution. The DBA's job at that point is just to clone the database and apply the mask. The DBA themselves don't get involved in what should be the right format. And that's the right thing to do because the business owner or the application owner is the one who knows best as to how data should be masked so that the application continues to perform accurately as in the test system, just as it would in the production system. The DBA can continue to carry out their duties, which is just create and provision databases and create these test systems securely using the mask definition that was provided by the Data Masking Pack. Oracle Data Masking Pack actually provides an integrated workflow to create secure test systems directly from production in a single workflow by copying or cloning production into a test environment, bringing up the database in restricted mode so that only sysDBAs have access to it. It runs the mask definition, and only after it's been applied successfully does it bring up the database for unrestricted use, such as by developers. If there's any problem in the masking process, the database remains in a restricted state, thereby making sure that the data cannot be accessed by developers until the masking process has been completed successfully. Before executing the mask, the Data Masking Pack actually completes a series of validation to make sure that the data mask can be completed successfully. It checks to make sure that the values are unique. It makes sure that the formats that are being used, applied, match the column data type. For instance, when you're generating character-based format for a column which is all numeric, Oracle Data Masking Pack warns you as part of the validation process. It also checks for space because it uses a high-performance create table and select process to generate the replacement mask table. It checks for space before it executes the process. And finally, if you have any constraints in there, it warns you to check for those as well, and as well as for any existing partitions, thus making sure that there is an alternate partition available test data to make sure that the values are consistent. By default, read-log generation is suppressed, but they can be enabled, and flashback log can also be enabled so that during the mask testing stage, if there's any problem with the mask or the mask values are not what are expected, then instead of having to refresh from backup, the customer can very simply flash back to the pre-mask state, fix the mask, and resume the process. Oracle Data Masking Pack by default collects statistics, but given that a lot of customers prefer to maintain their own stats collection mechanism, the Data Masking Pack allows you to disable the stats collection and plug in their own stats collection process if need be. And then finally, the degree of parallelism is something that is also under the control of the DBA, so that as they move the masking process from across different databases, the DBAs can configure the degree of parallelism as well to take advantage of the higher or slower processor machines. And therefore, by default, Oracle will compute the value, but DBAs have an additional degree of control available for the execution. And specifically for large data center environment where security is a key requirement, the Data Masking Pack provides support for key capabilities such as privilege delegation, which is making sure that the mask execution can take place under using sudo or power broker, as well as specify a common directory location if necessary to save the masking scripts, so that there's one place where all the scripts can be maintained instead of having a production servers, having non-production servers have scripts lying all over the place. And finally, the script that gets generated is a DB editable form, allowing the DBAs to extend their the script with their own custom commands, and it can integrate with any standard Oracle or non-Oracle cloning processes, such as if they want to use host-based either restore from export, or they want to use FlexClone, or any of those technologies. These PL/SQL scripts can be integrated into that process. So behind the cover, just to give you some ideas to how it runs, the Oracle Data Masking Pack builds a mapping table consisting of the original and sensitive data. It captures and disables the constraints on the sensitive table, such as employee, and renames the sensitive table to say employee temp. Then it recreates the mask table from this original table, replacing the sensitive values with the mask values coming from the mapping table. And so very quickly these tables are produced, which are then once the table is recreated, the constraints from the original table is put back onto the new table, stats collected, and the mapping table as well as the original table are dropped. And this is done until all the values all the tables that are containing sensitive data have been masked. So as a result of that, this is a high-performance masking system, allowing you to mask large numbers of columns and volumes of rows very, very quickly. So for instance, in tests on a 4-CPU single-core Pentium box, 215 columns were masked across 100 tables for a 60-gig database in about 20 minutes. Similarly, a 100 million row table where 6 columns were masked using the random number algorithm took about 1.3 hours. So this is a high-performance masking capability, allowing you to create test systems very quickly from production environments. As you think about it, as when you face with a production problem and you want your developers to diagnose it, you don't want the application DBAs to be spending time trying to provision these test systems and having the mask take a long time. Using the high-performance system, you can quickly provision a test system very easily, give developers for them to diagnose and troubleshoot so that production systems can be put back on track. Support-wise, the Oracle Data Masking Pack supports all Oracle databases from 9.9 through 11G, including 11.2, and all Oracle applications on the above database platforms. And it's supported within the Enterprise Manager and Grid Control 10.205 and upward release. The integration with Solix is, of course, certified for the most current release, which is 10.205. And with that, I want to just quickly cover the implementation process, which is, if you think about it, most implementations really come in two dimensions. One is privacy awareness, and second is application complexity. What this means is that some environments may have very high privacy awareness, some environments may have low privacy awareness. In other cases, the application may be very simple, easy, vanilla, or have very small in terms of masking requirements. In other cases, the application may be really complex. So if you think of most applications, they fall into one of these buckets. And as you consider your masking project, a lot more complexity and in your application, as well as when you don't know exactly where the data is, you can use templates to get started, but then ultimately you still need to go through an application discovery process, identify other custom fields or other dependent applications which may have mass data, and include them in your privacy catalog, and then create the test system and automate that process, and ultimately test your applications. So it's important to understand where you are in the data masking implementation continuum and choose the strategy based on where you fall in each of these 4 buckets. So with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Raghu, and then we can open it up for Q&A.
Thanks, Jagan. I appreciate going through the details on the data masking and what our sort of brings under the table, and then where sort of storage fits in. So I think at this point of time, we can open up for any questions. Yeah, I mean, any questions that you have, you could just page it to the host over the WebEx chat window. We already have a few questions coming in terms of like whether you would be able to have the presentation. Yes, we will be uploading the presentation on our website, and as soon as we do that, we'll send out the link over to you for you to download the presentation and go through it. And it'll always be available on the Solix website under the webinar link. And I have another question in terms of understanding about a published case where the data was leaked from the non-production environment. You want to add something onto Jagan that you are aware of, or Raghu that you want to put some words onto it?
Raghu, why don't you take it?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of published use cases or number of cases that have come up on where the data has been breached and so forth. And I don't know to kind of mention the names specifically, but these have happened in the retail industry where the data has been breached from the non-production systems, and other specific retailers would actually find the government bodies because the customer data has been sort of has been lost out to the outside world. This could be the credit card numbers and so forth. So definitely, number of cases are available on the internet itself. So any other question that attendees would have